When the clock ticked precisely at 5 p.m., the garage door of the Sloan family's mansion closed behind Nora like a final verdict with no turning back. She was officially no longer their daughter. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the glass windows, highlighting the navy buhl suitcase placed by the walkway next to an oak sideboard, a cherished family heirloom now ignored by all. Her father, tall and gaunt in an old suit, stood silently with his head bowed, offering no farewell. Her mother, with her wavy hair still dyed a soft golden brown, could only stare at her folded hands. In the sprawling living room, the clamor of Phoenix urban life felt distant, drowned out by the heavy sigh of her sister Zoe and the smug chuckle of her brother Eric, echoing in Nora's mind like a knife slicing through her heart. They had been waiting for her for a few minutes, arms crossed, their contemptuous gazes, as if she had never been part of this family. Less than an hour earlier, the invitation for a family reunion tonight had come via a curt text from her father, "Can you come home for dinner at 5?" No one hinted at what was to come, and there was no comforting aroma of her mother's baked ziti. Only a foreboding silence lingered. As Nora stepped into the living room, she felt the air thicken, as if the room had been deliberately packed with bricks around her. The door closed behind her with a sound like a drum signaling a new battle, and Nora knew she could no longer yield for even a second. Zoe, with her golden hair and slender frame, wore a cobalt blue business dress and curled her lips as if watching a captivating theater performance. "You took money from Mom and Dad's retirement account," Zoe said, her voice sweet but sharp as a blade. Eric, in his sleek athletic wear, stretched and smirked. "Or at least, that's what we know." They handed her a copy of a bank statement, a line circled in orange. Nora's ears rang, her heart seeming to stop. She knew she had never touched that money, not a single cent. She spoke, trying to keep her voice steady. I never..." But her words were cut off by a soft shove from her father behind her. "Quiet, Nora. No one here needs your excuses." Her mother, eyes red, shot her a look of betrayal before sighing. "We can't accept how much you've changed. We don't recognize you anymore." Those words shattered the last shred of faith in Nora's heart. As her parents continued their makeshift family trial, Nora's hand brushed against the suitcase. It felt like touching a cold stone. She lightly opened the latch, then quickly closed it, unwilling to reveal any clue about what she carried. Inside were just a few old clothes, a worn black leather diary and a family photo frame, one her mother had placed in the living room. Now she knew it had no place for her. The oak frame was tossed by her father into the trash bin by the garage door. The sound of it splintering echoed like her heart breaking. An hour of preparation had barely been enough to swallow her nausea. She stepped through the garage gate, her long black hair falling around her pale face. Her old sedan, filled with her worries and unfulfilled dreams, now became her temporary shelter. Nora slid into the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, motionless for a moment. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in a long time. Instead, there was only emptiness, a feeling as if her heart was being squeezed. She started the car, the engine sputter filling the empty garage. The drive from the Sloan house to the motel off the highway was only about 15 minutes on quiet roads, but to Nora, it felt like endless miles. The street lights along the highway flickered faintly, reflecting streaks of light on the car's windshield. The hot Arizona sunset wind carried the scent of dry dust, gasoline, and a yearning for freedom. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to go. Staying meant accepting a life she couldn't bear, being seen as a thief, abandoned by the very people she had given her heart to. The Desert Oasis Motel appeared after a curve, its vacancy sign flashing red neon. The scene was desolate, with rusted metal sheets around the nearby gas station and a low building with faded yellow paint. Nora rolled down the car window slightly, letting the warm air flood in, carrying the scent of bleach mixed with damp mold. She stepped out, locked the car with the remote, and trudged down the short hallway to her room. The thin wooden door, with its silver-painted room number, showed worn grain from years of neglect. Inside, Nora flipped the switch, and the dim yellow light flickered. The room stripped away any pretense. A bed with a stained quilt, a worn carpet with scattered spots, and a wall-mount air conditioner humming like it was whispering. She set her suitcase on the tiled floor and sat on the bed, still enveloped by a sense of collapse. After a long pause, she reached into her bag and pulled out a pregnancy test. Her heart raced, each beat threatening to burst from her chest. She took a deep breath, used the test, and placed it on the tiled surface. The seconds of waiting felt eternal. 2 lines appeared like words written in blood. Positive. Positive. Nora didn't scream or cry. She stared at the result, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. "My babies," she whispered, her voice choked. "You're the only truth they can't erase." She stood, trembling, and walked to the mirror separating the bathroom, gazing into her weary eyes reflected in the foggy glass. For the first time in years, she felt her heart beat fiercely, not from pain, but from a new beginning. She wasn't alone. Her babies would be with her forever. A knock at the door, sudden and familiar, startled her. Her eyes mixed worry with hope. "Who's there?" she called, voice hoarse. "Chris Miller," her old college friend who taught her gene splicing and encouraged her through doubts, appeared with a gentle smile and a brown paper bag. "I thought you might need this." He set the bag on the side table, pulling out a sandwich and 2 cups of black coffee. The aroma of fresh bread and roasted coffee filled the room, easing the harsh bleach scent. Chris stayed quiet, his kind eyes asking questions. Nora didn't know what to say. She just shook her head, lips trembling. Chris placed a hand on her shoulder, patting lightly as if to offer comfort. "You're not alone." Those simple words were like cool water in the scorching desert of her heart. In the silence, Nora pulled the black leather diary from her suitcase. She opened the first page, one she'd never shown anyone. Trembling handwriting about her research dreams, her fierce faith in science, and sleepless nights recording experiment results. "Remember this?" she asked, voice thick. Chris nodded, his eyes warm with respect. "I do. It was your pride." Nora closed the diary, feeling as if she'd reclaimed a piece of her lost soul. She turned to the city through the window. Streetlights, the distant silhouettes of skyscrapers, and dreams waiting for her to chase. When Chris left, promising to call a taxi to take her to Tucson to see an OB/GYN, Nora stood alone in the room. The neon vacancy sign cast shifting light and shadow on the opposite wall. She sat back on the bed, curling into the corner, clutching the diary to her chest. She was no longer the obedient daughter cast out by her family. She was a woman carrying 2 lives, and she had to be strong to protect them. A final tear rolled down her cheek, no longer heavy with regret, but clear with resolve. "I'll live for my babies, and I'll find justice." The door closed behind Chris's footsteps, leaving Nora in the small space, with only the hum of the air conditioner and distant car engines. She opened her phone, launched the Notes app, and wrote 1 line. "I start here." Then she set the phone down, lit a faint glow from the old desk lamp, the only thing in the room that worked well, and sat at the table, ready to document her past and plan her future. In the dim yellow light, her shadow stretched across the wall like a dual image, one stepping out of her family's darkness, and one preparing for a new battle with burning faith and hope. In the dim yellow light of the Desert Oasis Motel, the air seemed to freeze with each hum of the air conditioner. The thin wooden door creaked as Nora closed it behind her, shutting out the stifling heat and the mingled scents of bleach and damp mold. She stood for a moment before the wall-mount mirror, her vacant eyes staring at her reflection through the foggy glass. The 2 lines on the pregnancy test lingered in her mind. Positive, positive. Her heart pounded, each beat echoing like a war drum. She fought not to collapse, her hands lightly gripping the sink, the yellow light from the ceiling bulb dancing on a small crack in the tiled floor. Below, the sink's drain reminded her of the tears she couldn't hold back, but she paused, took a deep breath, and whispered, "My babies. You're the only truth they can't erase." The shock quickly gave way to a creeping fear. 2 tiny lives growing inside her, needing protection, needing care. Nora closed her eyes, set the test on the edge of the sink, and instinctively spread her hands over her belly. Through the narrow window, the neon vacancy sign flickered, its red glow reflecting on the wall, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow. She thought of her childhood bedroom, warm and cozy, where her grandmother used to tell her fairy tales before bed. Now her grandmother was gone, and the Sloan house felt so alien that not a trace of her grandmother's presence remained. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but Nora leaned against the wall, stifling any sobs. A sudden knock at the door rang out like a bell signaling something momentous. She flinched, frowned, then steadied herself. "Who's there?" Her voice came out hoarse. Nora opened the door. A warm but resolute voice called from the other side. Chris Miller, her old college classmate, stood behind the door, in a worn denim jacket, a faint smile on his face. His eyes betrayed unhidden worry. "You okay? I heard about—" I didn't know what to say. Chris pushed the door gently, stepping inside, bringing with him the strong aroma of roasted coffee and a steaming sandwich. The already cramped motel room grew darker as he entered, as if they were sharing a quiet moment amid the wreckage of her life. Nora stood in the middle of the room, watching Chris set a brown paper bag on the small table by the window. "Please, sit," she said, her voice rough with emotion. Chris sat silently on the edge of the bed, placing the sandwich on his lap and tilting his head to stare at the ceiling. "You don't have to say anything," he said slowly. "I just need to know you're not alone." His calm presence warmed her heart a little. She stepped back toward the dresser, offering a faint smile, trying to suppress the panic burning inside. "What do I do?" she asked. "First, I think you need to rest a bit. Eat something and then we'll figure it out." Chris carefully unwrapped the sandwich, holding it near her nose. The smell of bread, deli meat, and a hint of butter snapped her awake. She reached for a piece, a warmth spreading through her stomach. After taking a bite, Nora slowly sat beside Chris. He pulled out his smartphone and opened a notes app. "What's your next step?" he asked. Nora stared at the screen, a timeline flashing through her mind, the brutal family meeting, the cold motel, the test showing 2 lines. "I'm not going back home," she said firmly. "I need to talk to someone about pregnancy. Can you take me to Tucson?" Chris nodded without hesitation. "I'll call a taxi to take you to a doctor I know in Tucson. She's good, professional." Nora thanked him with a squeeze of his hand, her teary eyes glimmering with hope. The dawn of her prenatal checkup lay ahead, but she knew the road beyond would be just as rough. As the motel's light grew hazy, Chris stood, packing the paper bag, pregnancy test, and Nora's diary into a small travel bag. She took one last look in the motel mirror, studying her tired but resolute reflection. "Are you sure you'll help me?" she asked, her voice heavy with worry. Chris placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze steady. "I've known you since you dreamed of being a biology researcher. I won't let you go through this alone." His words anchored her to hope. Before leaving, Chris jotted down the motel's address on his phone, telling her not to leave the room. She returned inside, set her suitcase on the bed, lay down for a moment, eyes closed, trying to swallow the whirlwind of emotions. The next morning, her phone alarm blared at 6:30. She opened her eyes, seeing the clock. Outside, dawn glowed red, mixed with the desert's golden dust. Nora grumbled as she packed her suitcase, quickly washed her face, and slipped into a thin jacket and high-waisted jeans. She grabbed her travel bag and stepped into the hallway. Chris had called a taxi, a white car waiting out front. He stood there with tissues and a water bottle. On the road, white dust swirled as the taxi sped off. They didn't talk much, but the air felt warmer than the day before. The wind outside the window blended with the honks, signaling a new life unfolding. The drive to Tucson took about an hour and a half on I-10. Arizona unfolded with dusty mountains, golden-leaved mesquite trees, and stretches of sand and red earth. The scenery shifted as they entered Tucson. Lower buildings, softer sunlight, and a slightly cooler climate than Phoenix. Chris drove through a quiet neighborhood, tall trees shading both sides, clay-tiled roofs covered in moss. "This is Dr. Green's clinic," he said, pointing to an abbreviated sign on a red brick wall. "She specializes in obstetrics and high-risk pregnancies." Nora nodded, trying to quell her mix of nerves and hope. They stopped at a 2-story building with a sign reading, "Green Women's Health Clinic." The waiting room was spacious, painted crisp white, with rustic wooden-framed landscape paintings. Soft piano music echoed gently through the hallway. In the corner, a middle-aged woman in light blue scrubs greeted them warmly. "Hi, Miss Sloan, we have an 8 a.m. appointment, right?" the nurse said kindly. She led them to exam room 3. Nora's palms were sweaty, but she kept her face focused. Dr. Green's office was cozy and clean, its walls adorned with Latin American indigenous art. Dr. Green, youthful, with wavy brown hair, wore a white coat labeled Dr. Liz Green, M.D. She smiled warmly. "Hi, Nora. Chris referred you. Please lie down on the exam table and we'll do an ultrasound to check your health." As the ultrasound machine hummed to life, 2 tiny heartbeats appeared on the black and white screen, the sacred beat resonating. Nora gripped Chris's hand, her eyes welling up. She shivered with each movement of the probe on her belly, her heart full of awe. "You're carrying 2 healthy fetuses," Dr. Green said, her eyes wide at the clear ultrasound. 8 weeks, both heartbeats strong and steady. Her words rang like a clear bell, dispelling some of Nora's doubts and fears. Leaving the exam room, Nora walked slowly down the hallway, memories of the family meeting and the motel flooding back, now illuminated by a new light. She turned to Chris, offering a weary but determined smile. "I'm okay," she said softly. Chris nodded, quietly guiding her to the car. On the way back to Phoenix, they stopped at a small roadside cafe, its wooden tables scratched, cappuccinos steaming alongside salty butter cookies. The cozy space buzzed with familiar chatter. Nora bit into a cookie, chewing slowly, savoring the sweet, salty mix amid the rich coffee aroma. For the first time in days, she felt a moment of complete peace. By afternoon, they returned to the Desert Oasis Motel. Nora didn't go inside but sat in the car, staring into the empty old hallway. She pulled out her diary, flipping through pages she'd written before, recounting late nights with test tubes and dreams of starting a research company. "Now," she added, "May 12, ultrasound confirmed 2 healthy babies. I'll be strong." She closed the notebook, her heart brimming with resolve. Across from her, Chris rested a hand on the car door, nodding slightly. "Tomorrow, we start." No more words were needed. They both knew the road ahead would be tough, but they were no longer alone. As the sun set, the motel glowed in hues of orange and pink mixed with golden dust, its rusted tin roofs taking on an ancient sheen. In that moment, Nora felt her past, her pain and her hope blend into a song of life. She closed the door with each breath, ready for tomorrow, for the steps she'd take on a thorny but vibrant path. And as the neon vacancy sign flickered one last time before going dark, Nora knew she was no longer lost. She had become a woman ready to shape a destiny for the 2 tiny lives within her. In the early morning glow of the Sunrise Diner, the rich aroma of freshly roasted coffee and the faint sweetness of fruit syrup painted a serene scene. But for Nora Sloan, each heartbeat raced as if she were walking a tightrope across a century. The long glass door rattled each time someone entered, dawn sunlight filtering through white-striped curtains, casting beams on the worn oak tabletops. Nora and Chris Miller chose a corner by the window, where they could see Main Avenue's busy traffic and the blooming jacaranda trees at the street's edge. On the table, 2 cups of black coffee sat side by side. Nora hadn't taken more than a sip before looking up at Chris, his gentle smile like a lifeboat in a stormy sea. "Where do you think we should start?" Chris asked, his voice as warm as ever. His movements, from stirring his coffee to his attentive gaze, radiated reliability. Nora took a deep breath, letting the hot coffee vapor fill her chest, then looked up, determination clear in her eyes. "We'll launch Sawline Bio. I've drafted a roadmap for an early hormone detection product aimed at underfunded clinics." She pulled a sleek laptop from her bag, her fingers brushing the logo she'd designed, 2 interlocking circles resembling DNA in navy blue and silver, symbolizing trust and science. Chris leaned in, scrolling through the slides. The roadmap spanned from Q3 this year to Q4 next year, divided into 3 phases: preclinical research, Phase 1 clinical trials, and product commercialization. "I want to start with rural maternity clinics, where they lack modern equipment and staff," Nora explained. "That way we cut costs and put people at the heart of the research." Each word carried her burning desire to make a difference for communities, not just to chase wealth. Regular diner patrons passed by. An elderly couple at the next table chatted about their home garden. 2 young men in blue shirts with L logo bags dove into sandwiches and fries. They paid no mind to the biotech discussion, but for Nora, the blend of ordinary life and scientific ambition made her feel caught between 2 worlds. She quietly lifted her coffee, took a sip, and smiled at Chris. "Do you think we can find anyone to back our seed funding?" Chris snapped his fingers on the table. "I've reached out to a few angel investors from my list, but most aren't keen on backing a startup led by a single mom-to-be. They call it high risk." His brow furrowed, his eyes reflecting frustration on her behalf. Nora nodded slightly, steeling herself to prepare better. She opened the final slide, outlining a goal to raise $100,000, 0 cents, to accelerate testing. "We need to highlight the market potential. Over 50 million women in the U.S. lack access to early hormone testing. At $10, 0 cents per test, that's hundreds of millions in revenue." She spoke confidently, pointing to a market value bar chart. Chris grinned encouragingly. "The numbers are solid, but we need more practical data, like how many miles rural women travel to clinics or the average cost of tests at major hospitals." Nora nodded, jotting notes on her slide draft. "I'll compile more data. We could reach out to a nonprofit supplying mobile testing units. They've got a solid track record." She glanced at the counter, where she often grabbed salty butter cookies and light coffee, a rare treat that anchored her routine. As their discussion wound down, Chris picked up his phone, opening an email from a potential investor who'd promised to review the project. Nora held her breath. He swiped the screen, his face clouding. They replied, "After reviewing the pitch, we can't prioritize a startup led by a pregnant single founder. Best of luck." He read it verbatim, his voice tinged with sorrow. It felt like a train screeching to a halt mid-journey. Nora looked up, her eyes glistening. She wanted to scream, "Why?" but instead she gripped the edge of her seat. The silence between them stretched so long she could hear the blender whirring behind the counter. "I get it," Chris sighed. "They're not the last ones. I know you'll find someone." She closed her eyes, recalling months in the lab, ears tuned to the pipette's click, eyes fixed on fluorescent light reflecting off slides. Back then, she believed passion was enough, and the rest would follow. Now, she realized passion was just the starting line. She needed support, connections, and a bit of luck. Nora stood, reclaiming control. I'm not giving up. We'll find someone else. She typed rapidly on her phone, drafting emails to another 100 angel investors, attaching a condensed slide deck and a photo of the beep 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 double heartbeat, her ultrasound image, now part of the pitch. Chris watched her work, his eyes full of pride. You don't have to do it all alone, he said. Rebecca Bennett, the IP lawyer I know, said she'll help you sue the Sloan Foundation to reclaim your intellectual property rights. She might introduce you to investors interested in the legal and tech angles. The prospect of suing her family sparked new hope. If she won, she'd prove her worth to the world. Just then, Nora's phone buzzed. The screen flashed. Rebecca Bennett. Her heart leaped. It's Rebecca, she said breathlessly. You said she'd. Chris smiled warmly. Maybe she wants to talk directly now. Nora answered without hesitation. A strong female voice came through clearly. Hi, Nora. I've read your pitch deck and roadmap. Very impressive. I think you need legal support to protect your idea and attract investors. Miller filled me in. Can we discuss this afternoon? Nora swallowed hard. Yes, ma'am. I'd love to work with you. The call ended, and she looked at Chris, eyes brimming with hope. She said she'll help with the lawsuit and introduce investors. The first victory wasn't in dollars, but in reinforced belief. Nora closed her laptop, neatly packed her slides, and set the used pregnancy test on the table, next to a faint coffee stain. Outside the diner, the sun had risen high, its dazzling rays reflecting off the glass, making the place shimmer like golden armor. She stood, placing a hand on her chest, where her heart still pounded. We'll see this through. Chris stepped beside her, draping an arm over her shoulder, gentle as if cradling a newborn. That's the only way to live, he whispered. They walked out of the diner into the noisy street, horns blaring and voices buzzing, like two explorers leaving port for the open sea, ready to face any storm. On the way back, they stopped at a small stationery store, buying a brown leather notebook and a black ink pen. Nora dated the page, sketching a plan. Contact Rebecca, send documents, prepare legal filings, refine the pitch for the next seed funding round. Each stroke was a vow. She wouldn't let her idea be stolen or let herself fall. Then they visited a nearby bakery, splitting 2 apple pies with paper forks. The warm, subtle sweetness of the filling mirrored the faint hope within her, easily overlooked amid old scars. As dusk fell, vibrant graffiti murals on a red brick wall down the street seemed to whisper, "Never give up on your dream." Nora gazed at a giant DNA chain, its links painted in vivid colors, echoing her soul. She reached out, touching the faded paint, then turned to Chris. Tomorrow's our first meeting with Rebecca. We'll head back to the Phoenix courthouse. I want to retrieve some documents for the lawsuit. Chris nodded, promising to help with paperwork and pick her up at the law office. As the old sedan rolled through Phoenix's streets, streetlights flickered on, the diner growing quiet, only distant car sounds lingering. Nora leaned back, closing her eyes, reflecting on her journey. From her family's cold living room to the desolate motel, to the cozy diner, and now this dark road to a new home, a space shared with Chris and the 2 tiny lives within her. She smiled, knowing challenges lay ahead, but she was no longer alone. With renewed faith, she was ready to write the next chapter for herself and her babies, carving her place in this vast world with will and action. When the door opened to Chris's cozy apartment, its warm yellow light and small cactus on the windowsill greeted them. For the first time in weeks of turmoil, Nora's heart felt at peace. She opened her new leather notebook and began writing. Chapter 3, First Steps in Entrepreneurship and the First Failure. Thanks to Rebecca Bennett, we have a second chance. The pen glided across the page, carrying ambition, responsibility, and hope that one day, Sawline Bio would become a beacon for pregnant women everywhere. Just as she found light in the darkest night. The preliminary hearing at the Phoenix courthouse began on a scorching Tuesday morning in the Arizona desert. with streaks of sunlight streaming through towering glass windows, casting faint patterns on the cold granite floor. A small crystal chandelier hanging from the high ceiling tinkled softly as the coffee shop across from the courthouse opened its doors. But inside the courtrooms, only the measured footsteps and the creak of leather chairs filled the air as lawyers, plaintiffs, and defendants filed in. Nora Sloan, dressed in a navy mobile suit, ran her fingers over a thick binder stuffed with emails, a thesis, audio files, and lab records, all the evidence she and her lawyer, Rebecca Bennett, had gathered over weeks. She exhaled softly, trying to quell the storm of emotions within. This was her moment to step into the light and reclaim justice. As the heavy courtroom doors swung open, Nora and Rebecca entered. They saw the Sloan Foundation's lawyers already seated at the right table, their faces impassive, their crisp suits exuding an air of silent authority. To the left, a few witnesses and Rebecca's co-counsel arranged documents on their table. Up front, the courtroom was adorned with solemn decor. A raised judge's bench and portraits of past judges lining the walls as if watching every move. The judge, a petite middle-aged woman with her hair in a tight bun, took her seat, rapped her gavel 3 times, and directed everyone to settle in. "Order in court," the judge declared formally. "We begin the preliminary hearing for the case of Nora Sloan versus the Sloan Foundation, regarding intellectual property rights and a request for an injunction against any exploitation of the related scientific product." Rebecca Bennett stood promptly, pulling out neatly organized documents. Adjusting her glasses, she spoke clearly and confidently. "Your Honor, the Sloan Foundation, represented by Zoe Sloan, misappropriated Ms. Sloan's scientific research, patented it, and used it to secure funding under the Sloan Women's Empowerment Initiative. Our evidence includes a scanned copy of Ms. Sloan's doctoral dissertation submitted in 20XX, emails between Ms. Sloan and her academic advisor. Rebecca projected scanned emails with timestamps and slides from the dissertation showcasing the experimental method and initial results. Each slide drew the room's attention. She continued, "Most critically, an audio file from a Sloan family meeting on April 15, stored on a USB labeled Family Conspiracy. In it, you'll hear Miss Sloan's mother say, 'We need to remove Nora from the trust,' and Zoe say, 'We'll take the research.'" With a press of a button, the audio played, filling the room. Mrs. Sloan's trembling but resolute voice, Zoe's cold and calculating tone. The courtroom fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the audio system. The judge frowned, her eyes flashing with surprise at the pivotal evidence. She tapped her gavel. "This is highly significant. The hearing begins with an order to temporarily halt all activities related to the use, promotion, or transfer of the technology in question. This injunction takes effect immediately." The sharp rap of the gavel echoed like a bell, signaling a small but meaningful victory. Rebecca nodded to the judge, her eyes glinting with quiet joy and fierce determination. Nora clutched her binder, feeling the weight on her shoulders lighten. Next, the Sloan Foundation's lawyer stood, smoothing his suit jacket, his voice deep and confident. "Your Honor, this is a family matter, and we request the case be moved to internal mediation. The research has been revised multiple times. The initial results cannot be considered exclusively proprietary." He flipped through data files, arguing that the documents were heavily edited, so no single author can claim sole ownership. Rebecca countered swiftly, "Edits don't change the core." Miss Sloan conducted the experiments and finalized the work, supported by emails and lab records. All revisions were approved by her. The debate intensified, with both sides flashing slides and citing intellectual property laws, thickening the tension in the room. As the judge rapped her gavel to close the hearing, she fixed both sides with a stern gaze. "The court will review the evidence. Both parties should prepare additional materials. The injunction remains in place. If the defendant continues to exploit or develop products based on this research, the court will take stronger measures." She paused, adding, Miss Sloan may contact the court clerk for the official ruling and guidance on further submissions. The ruling was like a comma between two stories. One side had blocked illegal actions, while the other had to prepare its next move. Outside the courtroom, the courthouse hallway felt brighter and emptier. The ding of an elevator echoed and court staff and lawyers dispersed. Zoe Sloan appeared at the foot of the stairs, dressed in a sleek gray dress, her eyes partially hidden behind sunglasses. She paused, staring at Nora and Rebecca. Tilting her head, her lips pressed into a thin smile, she said softly, "Congratulations. This is just the beginning. We'll see you at the next level, Miss Sloan." Her words hung in the air, a calculated challenge. Nora felt a breeze slip through the glass doors, stirring the blinds and carrying fine desert dust. She didn't respond, only met Zoe's gaze briefly before turning to Rebecca. Her eyes brimming with resolve, Rebecca took her hand, whispering, "Don't worry. We'll gather more evidence, schedule depositions with 2 academic advisors and some lab technicians. Take a break, Nora. I'll have my assistant arrange everything." Nora nodded, her calm returning. They descended the courthouse steps into the sun-baked courtyard, the stone pavers radiating heat with each step. Outside, the taxi they'd called that morning waited near the gate, the driver scanning the area. Chris Miller, already there, hurried over, asking and patting Nora's shoulder, "Everything okay?" Before she could answer, Rebecca gripped Chris's arm. "We secured the injunction. Next, we prepare for the main hearing." Chris gave a small smile, turning to Nora. "I've set up a temporary workspace at a colleague's office, and all the files will be sent there." Nora nodded, her heart settling with trust. She glanced back at the courthouse, its glass windows gleaming in the sunlight, and thought, "Justice may be harsh, but I've planted my first footprint here." Instead of rushing to the taxi, they stopped at a small coffee shop a few blocks away. The place had exposed brick walls and a rustic wooden sign, with old wooden tables and creaking floors that sang with each step. The barista greeted them warmly. "Let me get you a spot by the window." Nora and Chris chose a corner overlooking the distant courthouse. Nora ordered a hot latte, Chris a green tea. They sat quietly, savoring the warmth of their drinks, letting the hearing's weight settle. Nora drifted into thoughts of the past weeks, from the desert oasis motel to the cozy diner, and now this little coffee shop near the courthouse. 3 distinct settings tied by one thread, her quest for justice and freedom. Chris stirred honey into his tea, chuckling at Nora. "I think you deserve the whole world's support." Nora smiled, her eyes sparkling with belief. "A world that doesn't know our story yet, but soon they will." She lifted her latte, sipping the bittersweet blend of espresso and frothy milk. A small inscription on the cup's base, "Steam and Stone," felt like a reminder. Be strong like steam, resilient like stone. Nora sighed contentedly, set the cup down, and jotted in her notebook. Preliminary injunction granted. Next, main hearing. Prepare additional witnesses, secure more emails and lab records. She closed the notebook, handing a note to Rebecca. "We can work at Brady's office, Chris's old colleague on the 5th floor of the Innovation Hub." Rebecca smiled. "Perfect. I'll arrange it." They stood to leave, stepping through the door, leaving the warm coffee aroma behind. As the taxi rolled through the streets, Phoenix glowed under the midday sun. Nora hugged, clutched her binder, gazing at the vast sky. She told herself, "Whatever lies ahead, I've stood my ground." Her heart surged with unwavering resolve to protect her rights, to prove a single mother could not only dream but master science and justice. As the taxi turned onto Main Avenue, the skyscraper offices seemed to beckon. A new opportunity awaited, alongside countless challenges, but Nora was ready to face them. In the vibrant glow of the Innovation Hub on Central Avenue, with its polished concrete floors and exposed brick walls etched with startup slogans like "Innovate or Evaporate," Nora Sloan paused at her fifth-floor desk. Her laptop, folded to save battery, sat beside a neatly arranged Sawline Bio briefcase and a steaming Vietnamese drip coffee maker, a testament to relentless work sessions. From the moment she stepped through the sliding glass doors, bathed in sunlight and desert dust, she knew today would be a turning point for her early hormone detection project. On her laptop screen was the pitch deck, slides detailing a 50 million woman rural market without access to services, core technology enabling hormone detection for $10.00 per test, a three-phase development roadmap, and a $100,000 0-cent seed funding goal. She took a deep breath, eyes fixed on the projected revenue chart, and told herself, "It's time to show what I've got." Chris Miller, behind her, nibbled a salty butter cookie, eyeing the final slide where the Sawline Bio logo gleamed. "We should add a BioVan case study," he suggested, pointing to the mobile testing unit description. "If investors see real-world feasibility, they'll trust us more." Nora nodded, swiftly editing the text. BioVan, a retrofitted van with a mini lab, delivering hormone testing on-site. Her keyboard clacked amid the bustling startup hub. Other teams debated, coffee aromas wafted, and a 3D printer hummed softly. She forced herself to focus, typing numbers and refining the narrative for maximum clarity. That afternoon, Rebecca Bennett arrived with her assistant, entering the small DIY lab near the hallway. "Miss Sloan, I've scheduled a deposition recording with Dr. Michaels tomorrow morning and an interview with technician Tony this afternoon," Rebecca announced. "Don't forget to email the updated pitch deck with the preliminary injunction. It's a big selling point." Nora flipped through a printed copy of the injunction, her eyes shining. "Solution. I'll add a slide on legal protection now," she replied, swiping on her tablet. Rebecca smiled with satisfaction. "We must balance legal and business. Show them Ms. Sloan has not just technology but a solid legal foundation." By evening, with babies Lily and Lucas asleep in their crib by Chris's corner, Nora switched on a desk lamp, opening an Excel tab with a cost breakdown. 1,000 test kits at $8.00 each, plus shipping and taxes, totaling $12,000, 0 cents for the preclinical phase. She quickly entered items: lab rental, consumables, part-time staff fees. Chris, pouring 2 cups of warm ginger tea, nodded encouragingly. $13,000, 0 cents left to raise. Nora smiled, touching the new notebook, adding investor outreach, 200 emails. Thursday morning at the familiar Sunrise Diner, Nora met Brady, a biomedical engineer, and saw the first test tube prototype in natural light streaming through the window. Brady explained how the mini spectrophotometer measured hormone levels in plasma samples. "We're at under 2% error," he said proudly. Nora jotted, "Buffer pH 7.4, 4, DGC storage." Chris recorded the demo on his phone for the pitch video. This technical collaboration was proof of Sawline Bio's superior feasibility. Late afternoon, after interviewing Tony, the lab technician, Nora urgently sent over 200 pitch emails to angel investors, attaching the updated injunction and BioVan demo video. Each email was a spark of hope, each click a step closer to funding. She imagined investors' eyes scanning the market numbers, tech slides, and legal commitment, then hitting accept. By the weekend, at a cozy sushi spot on Roosevelt Street, Chris said gently, "You deserve a little celebration." They ordered nigiri and sashimi, sipping warm sake. Soft jazz filled the intimate space, and Nora let her tension melt, savoring the rice and salmon dissolving on her tongue. Chris raised his glass. "To Sawline Bio and you, the strongest woman I know." Nora clinked her glass, eyes sparkling. "Thank you for always being there." Monday morning, the first investment email arrived. "Invest $25,000, 0 cents, confirmation sent." The green text glowed on her laptop like a promise of the future. Nora, trembling, opened the message, reading the anonymous investor's words. "Your conviction and clarity are unforgettable. Looking forward to supporting your journey." She blinked back tears, turning to hug Chris. "Did you hear? $25.00 K." Back at the Innovation Hub, beneath the vibrant graffiti DNA mural, Nora taped a small note. Received $25,000.00. A modest milestone in a grueling journey. Chris set a coffee cup on the desk, saying, "Now we start the preclinical phase." Nora returned to her screen, opening the timeline, nodding with resolve. Next week, order kits. Next month, testing. Soon, we'll raise Series A. The evening LED lights glowed, reflecting off the building's glass, guiding Sawline Bio forward. As the stroller carrying the twins rolled out of the hub, Phoenix shimmered under streetlights. Nora gazed at the starry sky, thinking, this is just the beginning. The biggest challenges are still ahead. The car sped off, leaving echoes of ambition and relentless determination. The crystal chandeliers sparkled on the ceiling of the Marriott downtown's ballroom, illuminating a corridor of healthcare leaders. But as Nora Sloan stepped onto the podium, all light converged on her and the first slide on the screen, a chart analyzing hormone responses by trimester. Her 10 fingers gripped the microphone, her heart racing despite her efforts to stay calm the night before. Hundreds of eyes in the audience seemed more focused than usual. The hum of attendees, clinking cutlery and pouring drinks falling silent, leaving only the rhythmic click of her slide remote. To the left of the stage, a massive 10-meter banner of Zoe Sloan loomed on white silk, its bold text, "Women Leading the Future of Health," sponsored by Zoe Sloan Foundation, vying for the audience's attention. The scent of fresh flowers on the podium mingled with the chill of air conditioning, creating an atmosphere both solemn and tense. Nora took a deep breath, glanced at the banner, then turned her gaze to the glass building behind the conference room, where reporters and cameras stood ready. Ear click. She pressed the remote, the second slide flashing the title, "Founding of Sawline Bio" by Nora Sloan, Ph.D., in progress because being a woman doesn't mean you disappear. A soft click echoed, and she began. "Good afternoon. I'm Nora Sloan, Ph.D., and today I'll share a story of science and humanity about early hormone testing for women underserved by healthcare." With each word, she delivered data clearly and concisely, guiding the audience from the problem over 50 million rural women travel more than 100 miles for testing to how Sawline Bio's portable biosensors and BioVan reduce costs and time while improving care quality. At the slide, evidence of original thesis, she slowly displayed a time-stamped, digitally signed email and a draft thesis file bearing her name and completion date, juxtaposed with a series of emails the Zoe Sloan Foundation used to secure funding based on that research. Without any credit to the original author, she spoke calmly but firmly. This data was collected and analyzed by me, and legal evidence led to a preliminary injunction from the Phoenix courthouse halting all exploitation of this work. Please review the next slide to understand how we ensure copyright and scientific integrity. In the audience, expressions shifted from curiosity to surprise, then support. The chat box on the live stream screen in the corner pinged with comments. "Wow, did she just mic drop? This is incredible. Respect." Camera flashes from reporters' smartphones lit up behind her, capturing the moment. Nora continued, "I didn't just build a product in the lab. I'm legally protecting this innovation and aiming to support small clinics, creating broader social impact. This isn't just technology, it's about women's fundamental access to healthcare." She clicked to the final slide, a photo of her hands cradling her pregnant belly, captioned, "You're not invisible. They just couldn't see what I was building yet." Soft background music played, and she concluded, "Sawline Bio wasn't born from glamour but from the pain of a woman cast aside, and it will rise as a beacon for the community." Applause erupted, resounding endlessly across the hall. As Nora stepped off the podium, Camden Miller, her steadfast partner, waved by the aisle, smartphone tripod in hand, having recorded the moment. He beamed with pride, extending his hand. "You did it." Nora nodded, tears of joy in her eyes. She knew this moment turned a milestone into a symbol, not just for Sawline Bio, but for every courageous woman. But the silence after the applause was heavy, as a small Zoe Sloan Foundation banner was brought to the entrance for display. Instead of being hung, it was quietly folded to make way for the next segment, the Q&A. A young panelist in classic glasses raised a mic. "Dr. Sloan, can you clarify how you obtained legal protection for your intellectual property?" Nora nodded, answering with professional English and legal precision. "I secured a preliminary injunction from the Phoenix courthouse after presenting irrefutable evidence, recorded family conversations where Ms. Zoe Sloan admitted to appropriating my work alongside dated theses drafts. The court recognized my copyright and issued a temporary ban on the Zoe Sloan Foundation's use of the research." She looked directly at the audience, her voice resonant. "This means any organization, sponsor, or investor tied to the Zoe Sloan Foundation risks legal consequences if they proceed without acknowledging my authorship." Some eyes widened, partly in shock, partly in awe of the legal strength backing her technology. After the Q&A, reporters swarmed her outside the hall, microphones raised, cameras panning. One asked, "Dr. Sloan, what message do you have for your family, who tried to erase you from both trust and technology?" Nora lifted her chin, eyes blazing with resolve. "I have nothing more to say to those who betrayed me. My message is for every woman feeling forgotten. You are not invisible, and your work is valid. Stand firm, protect your voice, and let your actions speak louder than their silence." Her words reverberated, stunning the crowd, as camera clicks and investors' murmurs of sealing the deal blended with the cheers of the packed audience behind. As dusk fell, golden light filtered through the large windows, turning the Marriott into a dreamlike painting. Nora, Camden, and Rebecca, their trio of allies, stepped onto the hotel's terrace, where the Zoe Sloan Foundation banner hung quietly. Camden held his phone, playing the live stream video, now with hundreds of thousands of views, comments, and shares. "How do you feel?" he asked. Nora smiled faintly, gazing at the fading horizon. "We won on that stage, but the real fight is just beginning." Her brow furrowed as she spotted her slightly worn sedan nearby, its windshield smeared with red spray paint. "Backstabber trash mom." A wry smile crossed Camden's lips as he nudged Nora toward the car. "I'm calling the police with you, then we'll head home for the next evidence folder." Nora's voice sharpened. "We're not just suing Zoe, we're going after those spreading malicious lies." In that fleeting moment, they knew the battle extended beyond the stage or conference. With legal and public opinion wars still looming, despair wasn't an option. Nora opened the car door, pulling out a thick folder with copies of lab records, emails proving authorship, bank statements, family audio recordings, legal invoices, and the preliminary injunction. It also held documents for an upcoming lawsuit, a request for a trial on intellectual property theft. She sighed, telling herself, "Don't falter. This is how I defend my worth and pave the way for a bigger project." Camden, beside her, handed her the folder, then glanced at the street's twinkling lights. "Ready?" he asked. Nora flashed a determined smile. "Always." The sedan's door closed, and under the Marriott's golden streetlights, their steps hurried toward the Phoenix courthouse, where they'd continue the legal fight and work toward the day Sawline Bio would be introduced nationwide, for a future where every woman has healthcare access.